Sarah Mitchell had stopped believing in miracles the day her 20th patient died in her arms. As a nurse in Chicago Memorial Hospital, she had learned that life was brutally simple. People got sick, some recovered, most didn't, and everyone eventually ended up as a name on a chart. At 32, she was burnt out, hollowed out, ready to walk away from everything she'd once loved. But then she found the box. A simple wooden box hidden in her grandmother's attic, containing 47 letters that would make her question everything she thought she knew about her family, her past, and the thin line between coincidence and destiny.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing.
The house smelled like mothballs and regret. Sarah stood in the doorway of her grandmother Dorothy's Victorian home in Lincoln Park, a place she'd visited countless times as a child but hadn't stepped foot in for nearly 5 years. Not since the arguments. Not since she'd told Dorothy she was wasting her life as a nurse, that she should have remarried after Grandpa Henry died, that she was too stubborn and too proud and too stuck in the past. Now, Dorothy was gone, and Sarah was left with nothing but an inheritance she didn't want and guilt that sat like acid in her stomach. The lawyer had been clear. Everything went to Sarah. The house, the modest savings account, the furniture, the memories. Sarah's mother, Elizabeth, had died 10 years ago from breast cancer, leaving Sarah as the sole heir to a family line that seemed cursed to end in hospital rooms, in funeral homes. Sarah walked through the ground floor, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood. The living room was frozen in time. The same floral couch from the 1980s, the same mahogany coffee table, the same framed photographs on the mantel. Dorothy at her nursing school graduation in 1961. Dorothy holding baby Elizabeth in 1963. Dorothy standing alone in front of this very house in 1975. No husband in sight, despite what everyone had assumed about Grandpa Henry. That was the thing about Dorothy. She'd always been private, almost secretive. She'd married Henry when Elizabeth was 12, and everyone had simply accepted the narrative that Henry was Elizabeth's father, that he'd been overseas or working in another city during the early years. But Sarah had always sensed something off in the story, some gap that no one wanted to discuss. Sarah climbed the stairs to the second floor, then pulled down the attic ladder. Dust particles danced in the afternoon light as she ascended into the cramped space. Boxes everywhere. Christmas decorations, old nursing textbooks, clothes from decades past. Sarah began sorting through items mechanically, creating piles. Keep, donate, trash. Then she saw it. Tucked behind a box of Elizabeth's childhood toys was a small wooden box, no bigger than a shoebox, with a tarnished brass lock. She pulled it free and shook it. Something shifted inside. Paper, maybe. She tried the lock. Stuck. She looked around and found an old letter opener and a desk drawer, then worked the lock until it popped open with a satisfying click. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Maybe 50, all in envelopes yellowed with age. Sarah picked up the first one. The envelope was addressed to J, with no last name, no address. Just J. The return address was Dorothy's. The postmark read April 15th, 1962. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was young Dorothy's. Sarah recognized it from old birthday cards, but the voice was different. Vulnerable, raw. Dearest J, I don't know if I'll ever send these letters, but I need to write them. I need to tell someone, even if that someone is just paper and ink. I'm pregnant. 8 weeks now. I've known for 2 weeks, and in that time I've cried more than I did in my entire life combined. My parents will disown me. The hospital will fire me. Society will brand me with a scarlet letter. But Jay, when I think about this baby, our baby, I feel something I've never felt before. Purpose, love, terror, hope. I know we can never be together. Not in this world, not in this time. I know what we did was dangerous, maybe even foolish.
But I can't regret it. I can't regret you. I'm going to keep this baby. I'm going to find a way to survive. And someday, maybe our child will live in a world where love isn't measured by the color of skin. Yours always, Dorothy. Sarah read the letter 3 times. Pregnant. Out of wedlock. In 1962. The scandal would have been devastating. But what caught Sarah's attention most was the phrase, the color of skin. She grabbed another letter, this one dated June 3rd, 1962. Dearest Jay, I saw you yesterday at the protest on Michigan Avenue. You didn't see me. I was across the street, hidden in the crowd of white faces watching the march. You were in the front line, holding a sign that read, Freedom Now. You looked so strong, so determined, so beautiful. I wanted to run to you, to tell you about the baby, about how I can feel the first flutters of movement now. But your friends were with you, and mine were pulling me away, and there's a chasm between us wider than Lake Michigan. I heard the white men behind me calling you names I won't write here. I heard them say, you people should know your place. And I stood there, silent, hating myself for my cowardice. I'm carrying your child, and I couldn't even defend you to a crowd of strangers. The baby kicked for the first time last night. I think it was angry at me too. Forever yours, Dorothy. Sarah's heart was pounding. Her grandmother had been in love with a black man in 1962, during the height of the civil rights movement. She'd gotten pregnant by him, and somehow, Sarah had never known. She tore through more letters, piecing together the story. James, his name appeared in a letter from August. James, an activist, a dreamer, someone who believed the world could change. Dorothy had met him at the hospital where she worked. He'd come in with injuries from a police beating during a sit-in. She treated his wounds, and they'd talk for hours, then days, then months. Then they'd fallen in love in a city and an era that would rather see both of them dead than together. The letters chronicled Dorothy's pregnancy, her isolation, her fear. Her parents had discovered the truth in her 7th month and kicked her out. She'd moved into a boarding house for unwed mothers on the South Side. She'd continued working at a different hospital, hiding her condition under loose scrubs until she couldn't anymore. She had given birth to Elizabeth alone on February 12, 1963, Lincoln's birthday. The symbolism hadn't been lost on Dorothy. But what happened to James? The letters never said. They were all addressed to him, but never sent, stored in this box like messages to a ghost. Sarah searched through every envelope looking for answers. At the bottom of the box, she found a photograph. It was crumpled and faded, but the image was clear enough. Dorothy, young and radiant, standing next to a tall black man with kind eyes and a wide smile. They were in front of a lake, Michigan probably, and their hands were almost touching, not quite, maintaining the plausible deniability of the era. On the back, in Dorothy's handwriting, James, summer 1962, the day I knew. Sarah sat in the dusty attic, surrounded by the wreckage of a love story she'd never known existed, and cried for the first time since her grandmother's funeral.
Sarah returned to work 3 days later, operating on autopilot. Chicago Memorial was understaffed as usual, the emergency department a war zone of overcrowding and undertrained residents. Sarah moved through her 12-hour shift like a ghost, taking vitals, administering medications, holding the hands of people who were terrified of dying. She'd been doing this for 10 years, and somewhere along the way she'd stopped seeing people. They'd become diagnoses, room numbers, problems to solve, or complications to manage. The burnout had crept up slowly, like carbon monoxide poisoning, until one day she'd realized she felt nothing at all. The letters had changed something, though. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Dorothy, alone in a boarding house, bringing a baby into a world that wanted to punish her for loving the wrong person. Dorothy had been a nurse too. She'd done this same work, held these same hands, seen these same tragedies, but she'd kept going. She'd found meaning somehow. Sarah was in the medication room when her charge nurse, Patricia, poked her head in. "Got an admission for you, Mitchell. Room 247. James Williams, 82. Acute heart failure. DNR on file. Comfort measures only. Family's been notified, but no one's coming." Sarah nodded, grabbing the chart. Another lonely death. The hospital was full of them. She walked to room 247 and pushed open the door. The man in the bed was thin, his brown skin ashen against the white sheets. Oxygen tubing ran to his nose, an IV drip in his arm, but his eyes were open, alert, watching her enter. "Good afternoon, Mr. Williams," Sarah said, her voice falling into the professional register she'd perfected. "I'm Sarah. I'll be your nurse today. How are you feeling?" "Like I'm dying," he said, his voice surprisingly strong. "But I suppose that's the point, isn't it?" Sarah checked his vitals, reviewed his medications. Heart rate elevated, but stable. Blood pressure low. Oxygen saturation hovering at 90%. He had days, maybe a week. "Is there anyone I can call for you?" Sarah asked, making a note in his chart. "No one left to call," James said. "Wife died in 98. Son died in Iraq in 04. No grandkids. Just me and this failing heart." "I'm sorry," Sarah said, automatically. "I'll be. I had a good run. 82 years is more than a lot of folks got. More than a lot of folks I knew got." Something in his voice made Sarah look up. "You mean during the civil rights era?" James's eyes sharpened. "You know your history." "I'm learning," Sarah said. And before she could stop herself, she added, "My grandmother was a nurse in Chicago in the 1960s. She was involved in the movement in her own way." "Is that right?" James shifted in the bed, wincing. "What was her name?" "Dorothy. Dorothy Harrison before she married. Dorothy Mitchell after." The change in James's face was instantaneous and devastating. Color drained from his already pale complexion. His hand gripped the bed rail so hard his knuckles went white. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Dorothy Harrison. Dottie. Sarah's heart stopped. "You knew her?" James's eyes filled with tears. "Knew her? Child, I loved her. I loved her more than I've ever loved anything or anyone in my entire life." The room tilted. Sarah grabbed the edge of the bed to steady herself. You're James. You're the one she wrote the letters to." "Letters?" James struggled to sit up. "What letters? We never got to. I was arrested in September 62, sentenced to 3 years for inciting a riot. It was a bullshit charge, but that's how they did things back then. When I got out in 65, I went looking for her, but her family had moved her away. No forwarding address, no trace. I searched for years, but she'd vanished like smoke." Sarah's mind was reeling. "She wrote you letters, 47 of them. She never sent them, just kept them in a box. She was pregnant, James. When you were arrested, she was pregnant with your baby." James made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. "Pregnant? I have a child?" "Had," Sarah said softly. "My mother, Elizabeth. She died 10 years ago. Cancer." "My mother," James was shaking now, tears streaming down his face. "Dorothy had my baby? She had our baby and I never knew. Oh God, what did I miss? What did she go through alone?" Sarah found herself crying too, standing in a hospital room with a dying man who was also somehow her grandfather. Sarah Mitchell thought she'd found the end of her grandmother's story in a box of old letters. Instead, she'd found the beginning of her own, and the man who held all the missing pieces was dying in room 247. James Williams became Sarah's patient and her priority. She traded shifts, called in favors, made sure she was assigned to him every day she worked. Patricia thought she was losing her mind. Sarah thought she might be right. She brought the letters to the hospital, carrying them in her backpack like contraband. During her break, she'd sit in James's room and read them aloud. Sometimes he'd listen in silence, tears running down his face. Sometimes he'd interrupt with memories, filling in the gaps. "That protest on Michigan Avenue," he said when Sarah read the June letter. "I remember that day. There was a woman in the crowd across the street, and for a second I thought it was Dottie, but I told myself I was seeing things, that she wouldn't be there, that she'd moved on." Now, moved on. She was carrying my child, and I didn't know." "She didn't blame you," Sarah said. "She knew what you were fighting for. She believed in it." "Did she really? Or did she write that because it made the abandonment easier to bear?" "You didn't abandon her. You were arrested. That's not the same thing." "Isn't it? I knew the risks. I knew they were coming for the organizers. I could have been more careful, could have kept my head down, could have been there when she needed me. Instead, I chose the movement. I chose the cause over the woman I loved." Sarah had no answer for that. She'd read enough of the letters to know that Dorothy had struggled with the same question. Had James loved her, or had he loved the idea of breaking barriers more? The letters never resolved it. Some days Dorothy wrote with understanding and forgiveness. Other days the hurt bled through every word. "She kept you secret," Sarah said finally. "She never told anyone who my mother's father was. Not my mother, not me, not anyone. She married my grandfather, Henry Mitchell, when my mom was 12. Everyone assumed he was the father." "Henry Mitchell," James repeated. "Was he good to her? To Elizabeth?" "I don't know. He died before I was born. My mom always said he was quiet, kind, distant, like he was doing a duty rather than living a life." "So Dottie was alone." James closed his eyes. "She was alone for 12 years raising our daughter by herself, and then she married a man who was kind but distant. What a waste. What a goddamn waste." I wanted to argue, to defend my grandmother's choices, but I couldn't, because I'd been reading the letters chronologically, and I'd reached 1965, right after James's release. The letters from that year were different. Angrier, more desperate. Dorothy had written about seeing James's name in the paper, about knowing he was out of prison, about waiting for him to find her, but he never did. Except he tried. James swore he tried. He'd gone to the hospital where they'd met, but she didn't work there anymore. He'd gone to her parents' house, but they'd moved to Indiana. He'd asked everyone he knew, followed every lead, but the trail always went cold. Eventually, he'd given up, convinced that she'd moved on, maybe gotten married, maybe wanted nothing to do with the ex-convict activist who'd destroyed her life.
"I should have tried harder," James said. "I should have never stopped looking." "She should have reached out," Sarah countered. "She knew your name. She could have found you. Could she? A white woman looking for a black ex-con in 1965 Chicago? What do you think would have happened to her? To Elizabeth?" James shook his head. "No. She did what she had to do to survive. I understand that. I just wish..." He trailed off. "Wish what?" "I wish I could have met my daughter. I wish I could have told Dottie I'd never stop loving her. I wish I could have been a father, a grandfather. I wish I hadn't wasted my whole life fighting for a world I'd never get to live in." "The world did change," Sarah said. "Not enough, not fast enough, but it changed. You helped do that." "At what cost?" James looked at her with eyes full of regret. "I have no family, no legacy. No one to remember me when I'm gone. The movement didn't need me. There were thousands of others, but Dottie needed me. Elizabeth needed me, and I wasn't there." Sarah felt something crack open in her chest, because she'd been asking herself the same question for months now. What was she sacrificing for her career? She had no partner, no children, no close friendships. She devoted everything to nursing, and for what? To burn out at 32? To become another cynical, exhausted healthcare worker counting down to retirement? Do you regret it? The activism, the movement, all of it? James was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "I regret that I thought I had to choose, that I couldn't fight for justice and fight for love at the same time, that I let myself believe the revolution was more important than the human being I loved. If I could do it over..." He paused. "But that's the point, isn't it? We don't get to do it over. We just get the one life, the one chance, and we spend it making mistakes we can't take back." Sarah thought about Dorothy's letters, about the life her grandmother had lived, alone for 12 years, then married to a kind stranger, then widowed again, then alone once more until she died in this very hospital, surrounded by nurses she'd mentored, but no family to hold her hand. "She never stopped loving you," she said quietly. "I read every letter, 47 letters over 3 years, and every single one ends with yours always, or forever yours, or all my love. She never stopped." James closed his eyes, and Sarah watched a tear slip down his weathered cheek. "Then we were both fools. 2 people who loved each other, and we let the world keep us apart. What a waste. What a goddamn tragic waste."
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Sarah brought James home on a Saturday. It took 3 phone calls, 2 doctor consultations, and 1 minor violation of hospital policy, but she did it. She signed out a wheelchair, loaded James into her car, and drove him to Dorothy's house in Lincoln Park. "This is it," she said, pulling into the driveway. "This is where she lived for 50 years. James stared at the Victorian facade, his face unreadable. "She had a good life." "Did she?" Sarah helped him into the wheelchair. "Or did she just survive?" They went inside. Sarah had cleaned the place up over the past 2 weeks, sorting through decades of accumulated possessions. She'd kept the photographs, the furniture, the sense of Dorothy's presence. The house still smelled like her grandmother's lavender perfume. Sarah wheeled James into the living room and positioned him in front of the mantel. The photographs were all there, Dorothy's life in chronological order. Nursing school, Elizabeth as a baby, Elizabeth's first day of school, Dorothy and Henry's quiet wedding, Elizabeth's college graduation, Elizabeth holding baby Sarah, and finally, Dorothy in her 70s, alone again after Henry's death, standing in front of the same house with a slight smile on her face. "That's Elizabeth," Sarah said, pointing to her mother as a baby. "Your daughter." James reached out with a trembling hand, his fingers hovering over the glass. "She looks like Dottie." Everyone said so. Same eyes, same smile. "She's beautiful." Was beautiful. James's voice broke. "Tell me about her. Tell me everything." So Sarah did. She told him about Elizabeth's love of reading, her career as a librarian, her passion for social justice that she'd inherited from both parents without knowing it. She told him about Elizabeth's diagnosis, the brutal 18 months of treatment, the way she'd faced death with dignity and grace. "She sounds remarkable." She was. Sarah swallowed hard. "She would have wanted to know you." "Would she? Or would she have hated me for abandoning her mother?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted, "but I think she deserved the choice." James nodded slowly. "Dottie made decisions for everyone, didn't she? Decided I couldn't be a father, decided Elizabeth couldn't know her real heritage, decided the truth was too dangerous to tell. She protected everyone by keeping secrets. Is that wrong? I don't know. Is it wrong to lie to protect the people you love? Is it wrong to erase someone from history because telling the truth would be inconvenient or painful?" James looked at Sarah. "What do you think?" Sarah had been asking herself the same questions. She'd discovered that her entire family history was a fabrication. Her grandmother hadn't been married to Elizabeth's father. Her mother had grown up not knowing her real heritage. She herself was the granddaughter of a civil rights activist connected to a history she'd never been taught. "I think she did what she thought was right," Sarah said carefully. "But I also think secrets have a cost. They isolated her. They kept her alone. Maybe she wanted to be alone. Maybe that was easier than explaining. Or maybe she was scared. Maybe she thought no one would understand." James was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There's something I need to tell you. Something I haven't said." Sarah waited.
I didn't just know Dottie. I didn't just love her. I was married when we met. My wife was pregnant with our son. I was cheating on my family with your grandmother. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. What? My wife, Clara, she knew. She found out about Dottie in August '62, right before I was arrested. She was the one who turned me into the police. She called an anonymous tip about where I'd be the night of the raid. She sent me to prison because I'd betrayed her. Sarah felt sick. Did my grandmother know? Yes. I told her the truth from the beginning. She knew I was married, knew I had a pregnant wife at home, and she chose to be with me anyway. James looked up at Sarah with red-rimmed eyes. We were both selfish, reckless people who hurt everyone around us for the sake of what we wanted. And when I went to prison, Clara told me she never wanted to see me again. She raised our son alone, just like Dottie raised Elizabeth. I destroyed 2 women's lives because I couldn't control myself. Sarah's mind was spinning. This wasn't the romantic tragedy she'd constructed in her head. This was messy, complicated, stained with betrayal and cowardice. Dorothy hadn't been the innocent victim. She'd been the other woman. And James wasn't the hero torn apart by an injustice. He was a man who'd abandoned 2 families. Why are you telling me this? Sarah asked. Because you deserve the truth. Because I've spent 60 years lying to myself about what I did, justifying it, pretending I was a victim of circumstance. But the truth is, I made choices. Bad choices. And those choices rippled out and destroyed lives. James gripped the wheelchair arms. Your grandmother was a good person who made a mistake. I was a selfish person who made excuses. There's a difference. Sarah thought about the letters, the devotion in every line. She loved you anyway. Love isn't an excuse for harm, James said. That's what I learned too late. You can love someone and still be wrong for them. You can want something desperately and still have no right to it. Sarah sat down heavily on the couch. Every narrative she'd built over the past 2 weeks was crumbling. She'd been focused on the romance, the forbidden love, the tragedy of separation that she'd ignored the ugly reality underneath. Dorothy and James had hurt people. They'd been reckless. And 3 children, Elizabeth, James's son, and eventually Sarah herself, had grown up in the wake of their choices. Your son, Sarah said. What happened to him? Marcus. He grew up hating me. Clara remarried when he was 5, and Marcus took his stepfather's name. I tried to reach out when he was 18, but he wanted nothing to do with me. He joined the army at 20, did 2 tours in Iraq, and died in Fallujah in 2004. He was 39 years old. I went to the funeral. Clara spat in my face. Marcus's widow wouldn't let me meet my grandchildren. I was the stranger who had abandoned them, and they wanted nothing to do with me. I'm sorry, Sarah whispered. Don't be. I earned every bit of that rejection. What I'm sorry for is that Dottie spent her life carrying my secrets, that Elizabeth grew up not knowing her father, that you are sitting here now trying to make sense of a mess that started before you were born. Sarah looked at the photographs on the mantel, seeing them differently now. Dorothy's slight smile in the final picture. Was that peace or resignation? Had she forgiven herself for what she'd done? Or had she carried the guilt and shame until the day she died? She kept your letters, Sarah said. She kept your photograph. She wrote to you for 3 years. That has to mean something. It means she loved me. But love doesn't make things right, Sarah. Love doesn't erase the harm we cause. Sarah thought about her own life, her own choices. She devoted herself to nursing, convinced she was helping people, making a difference. But what had she really accomplished? She'd saved some lives, yes, but she'd also lost herself in the process. She was burnt out, bitter, disconnected from everyone around her. She'd sacrificed relationships, joy, meaning, for what? For a career that was grinding her down to nothing? Maybe she was more like Dorothy than she'd realized. Both of them hiding behind duty and sacrifice, both of them too afraid or too proud to admit they made mistakes, and both of them ending up alone. "What do I do with this?" Sarah asked. "What do I do with the truth?" James looked at her with exhausted eyes. "You live with it. You accept that people are complicated, that history is messy, that there are no pure heroes or simple villains. And then you decide what kind of person you want to be. You decide whether you'll repeat the patterns or break them." Sarah thought she'd uncovered a love story. Instead, she'd found betrayal, secrets, and the cost of choices made decades ago. Now, sitting in her grandmother's house with the man who destroyed 2 families, she had to decide, was she her grandmother's granddaughter, doomed to repeat the same mistakes? Or could she break the cycle before it consumed her too?
James died 4 days after their conversation. Sarah was with him when it happened, holding his hand in room 247 as his heart finally gave out. He went peacefully, quietly, whispering Dorothy's name with his last breath. Sarah signed the death certificate, notified the morgue, and called the funeral home James had arranged. No family to contact, no one to mourn him except a granddaughter he'd known for 2 weeks. She didn't cry. She felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped out everything inside her and left only the shell. She finished her shift, drove home to her apartment, and sat in the dark, wondering what the point of any of it was. The next morning, she called in sick for the first time in 3 years. Then she drove to Dorothy's house and started searching. She'd read 47 letters, but there had to be more. More photographs, more evidence, more pieces of the story. Sarah tore through the attic, the bedroom, the closets. She found old nursing textbooks, Elizabeth's baby clothes, Henry Mitchell's military discharge papers, but nothing about James. Nothing that proved he'd existed in Dorothy's life beyond that single summer photograph. Then in a box of papers in the bedroom closet, Sarah found it. A journal. Dorothy's journal started in January 1963 and continued sporadically until December 1964. Sarah sat on the floor and began to read. The early entries were devastating. Dorothy, chronicling her isolation, her shame, her terror as her pregnancy progressed. She wrote about losing her job, about the boarding house for unled mothers, about the other women there, teenagers mostly, who'd made the same mistake Dorothy had. She wrote about labor, about giving birth alone while nurses she'd once worked with refused to look her in the eye. She wrote about holding Elizabeth for the first time and feeling both overwhelming love and crushing despair. But it was the later entries that made Sarah's blood run cold. March 3rd, 1963. Clara came to see me today, James's wife. I don't know how she found me, but she did. She stood in the doorway of my room at the boarding house, looking at Elizabeth in my arms, and I saw everything in her face: hatred, jealousy, pain. She told me James was in prison because of me, that I'd destroyed her family, that I was a whore and a homewrecker. She told me her son would grow up without a father because I couldn't keep my legs closed. I wanted to defend myself, to say that James had lied to me, that I didn't know he was married until it was too late. But that would be a lie, and I'm done with lies. I knew. From the second encounter, I knew he wore a ring and took it off when he saw me. I knew he had a wife at home. I knew, and I didn't care because I wanted him, because I loved him, because I was young and stupid and selfish. Clara left after she said her piece, but before she went, she looked at Elizabeth and said, "That baby deserves better than a mother like you." And she's right. Elizabeth deserves better. She deserves a father who's present, a mother who isn't drowning in shame,
a life that isn't defined by sin and secrets. I don't know how to give her that. I don't know how to be what she needs." Sarah read on, her hands shaking. The entries became darker, more desperate. Dorothy wrote about considering adoption, about the social worker who came to evaluate her, about the meetings where they discussed Elizabeth's prospects. She wrote about the relief she felt at the idea of giving her daughter away, and then the guilt that followed that relief. But then, in September 1963, "I'm keeping her, I've decided. The social worker thinks I'm making a mistake, that Elizabeth would be better off with a proper family. But I can't do it. I can't give her away. Not because I'm strong or brave. I'm neither of those things. I'm keeping her because she's all I have left of what I thought my life would be. She's evidence that I existed, that I loved someone, that I wasn't always this broken, hollow person. It's selfish. I know it's selfish, but I don't care anymore." The journal continued for another year. Dorothy writing about finding work at a new hospital under a different name, about the lies she told about Elizabeth's father, killed in a car accident, she said, about the slow rebuilding of something resembling a life. And then, December 18th, 1964, "I saw James today. He's been released from prison, and he came looking for me at my parents' house. My mother called to tell me, to warn me. She said he looked thin and tired and desperate. She told him I'd moved away, married someone else, wanted nothing to do with my past. She told him to leave me alone. I could have corrected her. I could have given James my real address, my phone number. I could have told him he has a daughter. But I didn't. Because what would be the point? He destroyed Clara's life for me, went to prison, lost his son. And I destroyed my own life for him, lost my career and my family and my reputation. We ruined everything we touched. And if we came together again, we'd just ruin more. Some loves are toxic. Some loves burn everything down. James and I are that kind of love. So I'm letting him go. I'm letting him believe I've moved on, that I'm happy, that our summer together was just a mistake I've forgotten. It's a kindness, really. The kindest thing I can do is disappear. He'll be fine. He'll rebuild his life, find someone else, maybe even reconcile with Clara and Marcus. And I'll rebuild mine with Elizabeth. We'll be fine. We'll all be fine." The journal ended there. No more entries. Sarah flipped through the remaining pages, all blank. Dorothy had closed that chapter of her life and never looked back. Except she had looked back. She'd kept the letters, the photograph, the journal. She'd hidden them away like contraband, but she'd kept them. She'd spent 50 more years in this house, married Henry Mitchell for practical reasons, raised Elizabeth as a single mother in all but name, and died alone in a hospital room. Sarah felt a surge of anger so intense it made her nauseous. Dorothy had let James go. She'd made the choice to stay apart, to let him believe she'd moved on, to keep Elizabeth's father a secret. It wasn't fate or circumstance or the cruel machinery of racism and injustice. It was Dorothy's choice. And James had accepted it. He'd searched for a while, half-heartedly maybe, and then he'd given up. He'd moved on with his life, continued his activism, had other relationships. He'd had 60 more years to find Dorothy, to reach out, to fight for his daughter, and he hadn't. They were both cowards, both of them too damaged and too afraid to do the hard work of actually being together. They'd convinced themselves their sacrifice was noble, that staying apart was protecting everyone, that their love was too dangerous to pursue. But really, they were just scared. Scared of judgment, scared of difficulty, scared of having to face Clara and Marcus and the mess they'd made. So they hid. Dorothy behind her walls of secrecy, James behind his activism and regret, and Elizabeth paid the price. My mother grew up without a father, with a mother who was emotionally distant and buried in work. She'd spent her whole life wondering why she felt incomplete, why Dorothy never seemed fully present, why there was always this shadow hanging over their family. I thought about her relationship with Elizabeth, the distance that had grown between them in the final years, the conversations they'd never had, the things left unsaid. Sarah had been so consumed with nursing school, then her career, that she'd barely been home during her mother's illness. She'd told herself she was being professional, maintaining boundaries, that she couldn't be both daughter and caregiver. But really, she'd been hiding too. Hiding from the pain, from the inevitability of loss, from having to face the fact that she was about to be completely alone in the world. 3 generations of women all hiding, all choosing isolation over vulnerability, all convincing themselves that sacrifice and duty were the same as love. Sarah closed the journal and sat in the silence of Dorothy's bedroom. The house felt different now, not like a mausoleum to a noble woman's life, but like a mausoleum of wasted chances. Every room was filled with the ghosts of conversations that never happened, relationships that were never pursued, truths that were never told. Her phone rang. Patricia from the hospital. "Mitchell, I know you're sick, but we're absolutely drowning here. Any chance you can come in for a few hours, just to help with the evening rush?" Sarah opened her mouth to say yes, to fall back into the pattern, to bury herself in work, to hide from the uncomfortable revelations swirling in her head. But then she heard herself say, "No, I can't. I'm sorry." "Are you okay? You never say no." "I know. That's the problem." She hung up before Patricia could respond. Then she sat there, heart pounding, feeling like she just stepped off a cliff.
Sarah spent 3 days alone in Dorothy's house, reading and rereading the letters and journal. She was supposed to return to work, supposed to start dealing with the estate, supposed to get her life back on track. Instead, she found herself paralyzed, unable to move forward or back. On the 4th day, she found the last letter. It was in a different box, in a different part of the attic. An envelope addressed to Elizabeth in Dorothy's handwriting, dated December 1995, a year before Dorothy's death. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened it. "My dearest Elizabeth, I'm writing this letter knowing I'll probably never have the courage to give it to you. But I need to write it anyway, need to get the words out before they consume me entirely. Your father's name was James Williams. He was a good man who made mistakes, just as I was a good woman who made mistakes. We fell in love in a world that told us we had no right to love each other. And when that world tore us apart, I made a choice. I chose to let him go. I chose to raise you alone. I chose to keep secrets rather than face the truth. I've spent 33 years wondering if I've made the right choice. And I still don't know. What I do know is this: you are the best thing I ever did. You are kind, brilliant, passionate about justice in ways I could never be. You have your father's courage and, I hope, my capacity for love. You deserved to know him. You deserved to have both parents in your life, and I robbed you of that because I was afraid. I was afraid people would judge you for being biracial. I was afraid you'd hate me for the affair. I was afraid James would disappoint you or that bringing him into our lives would dredge up pain better left buried. I told myself I was protecting you, but really I was protecting myself. From consequences, from hard conversations, from having to admit I'd made irreversible mistakes. I'm writing this now because I'm 62 years old and I've been diagnosed with heart disease. The doctor says I have time, but time is relative and I've wasted so much of it already. I want you to know the truth. I want you to know that you are loved, that you were wanted, that every choice I made, right or wrong, was made with you in my heart. But I'm still a coward. I'm writing this letter and I'm putting it in this box and I'm hiding it away like I've hidden everything else. Maybe you'll find it someday. Maybe you won't. Maybe it doesn't matter. What matters is that you know your father loved you before you were born, even though he never got the chance to meet you. And I loved you enough to do the impossible, to survive in a world that wanted to destroy me for having you. That has to count for something. All my love. Always. Mom. Sarah read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Dorothy had written this when Elizabeth was 33,
the same age Sarah was now. She'd known the truth needed to be told, had even written it down, but still couldn't bring herself to actually give her daughter the letter. Elizabeth had died not knowing. She'd lived her entire life with a hole in her history, a father who was erased, a heritage that was hidden. And Dorothy had carried that secret to her own grave, dying 5 years after writing this letter, never finding the courage to speak the truth out loud. Sarah felt a wave of grief and rage wash over her, not just for Elizabeth, not just for Dorothy and James, but for all of them. For every moment of connection they could have had and didn't. For every question Elizabeth must have asked that Dorothy deflected. For every time James wondered about his daughter. For the 60 years they all spent in their separate corners nursing their wounds, convincing themselves that silence was strength. And then Sarah realized she was doing the exact same thing. She'd spent the last 2 weeks uncovering Sarah's grandmother's secrets, judging choices made 60 years ago, building narratives about their failures, but she hadn't looked at her own life. She hadn't acknowledged that she was 32 years old, burnt out, isolated, hiding behind her career just like Dorothy had hidden behind single motherhood and Henry Mitchell's convenient presence. Sarah had no partner because she was afraid of vulnerability. She had no close friends because she was afraid of being seen. She was considering quitting nursing because it was easier to run away than to figure out why she'd lost her passion in the first place. She was her grandmother's granddaughter, choosing isolation over risk, duty over joy, hiding over honest connection. The pattern was clear. 3 generations of women, all alone, all convinced they were doing the right thing, all slowly dying of the same disease. The inability to be vulnerable, to ask for help, to admit they couldn't do everything by themselves. Sarah looked around Dorothy's house, her house now, and saw it for what it was. Not a home, a hiding place. Just like her apartment was a hiding place, just like the hospital was a hiding place. Everywhere she went, she was running from the same thing that Dorothy had run from. The messy, complicated, painful work of actually living. She picked up her phone and called Patricia. "I need to talk to you, not about work, about me." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Okay, when?" "Now, can we meet for coffee?" "Sarah, are you okay?" "No," Sarah said, and the honesty of it felt like breathing after being underwater. "I'm really not okay, and I need help." Sarah Mitchell had spent 2 weeks unraveling her grandmother's secrets, judging choices made 60 years ago. But the real question wasn't what Dorothy and James had done wrong, it was what Sarah was going to do differently. Breaking a generational pattern meant being braver than she'd ever been. It meant risking everything her grandmother had been too afraid to risk. It meant choosing vulnerability over safety, connection over isolation, truth over comfortable lies. Sarah met Patricia at a coffee shop near the hospital. She ordered a latte she didn't drink and told Patricia everything. About Dorothy and James, about the letters, about Elizabeth never knowing her father, about the journal and the patterns, and the realization that Sarah was repeating her grandmother's mistakes. Patricia listened without interrupting. When Sarah finally ran out of words, Patricia said, "So what are you going to do?" "I don't know. That's why I called you. I need someone to tell me I'm not crazy for wanting to change everything about my life." "You're not crazy. You're burnt out, and you've been burnt out for at least a year. I've been watching it happen." "Why didn't you say something? Would you have listened?" Patricia raised an eyebrow. "You've spent the last 3 years turning yourself into a machine. Perfect attendance, extra shifts, never complaining, never asking for help. You were so determined to be the best nurse, the most dedicated, the one who never breaks. But Sarah, everyone breaks eventually. The only question is whether you break in a way you can recover from." Sarah felt something crack open in her chest. "I don't know how not to be this person. I don't know how not to hide behind work." "Then learn. That's what therapy's for. That's what friends are for. That's what living's for." "I don't have friends, not real ones. I have coworkers and acquaintances and people I used to know in nursing school who I never call." "You have me," Patricia said firmly. "If you want. I've been trying to be your friend for 3 years, but you've kept me at arm's length the whole time. So now I'm asking, do you want a friend or do you want to keep hiding?" Sarah started crying right there in the coffee shop, ugly tears that she couldn't control. "I want a friend. I want to not be alone. I want to figure out how to be a person again instead of just a nurse.
Okay, then. Patricia reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. That's where we start. You being honest. You letting people in. You accepting that you're human and you need help. And that's not a weakness. It's just reality. They talked for 2 hours. Patricia shared her own story of burnout, how she'd almost quit nursing 5 years ago before finding a therapist and a meditation practice and a way to set boundaries. She gave Sarah the name of her therapist, made Sarah promise to call, made Sarah promise to stop taking extra shifts and to actually use her vacation days. "What am I supposed to do with vacation days?" Sarah asked. "I don't have anywhere to go." "Then figure it out. Take a class, learn to paint, volunteer somewhere that's not a hospital, join a book club, go on terrible dates, do anything that reminds you there's a world outside these walls." Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. "My grandmother spent 50 years in nursing. She never took vacation. She never dated after Henry died. She just worked and came home and worked and came home until she died in room 312 of heart failure." "And you're afraid you'll do the same thing?" "I'm already doing the same thing. That's what terrifies me." Patricia squeezed her hand. "Then do something different. Make one choice your grandmother wouldn't make. Then make another. Then another. That's how you break the pattern." Sarah thought about Dorothy's letter to Elizabeth, hidden away and never sent. She thought about James dying alone in room 247, whispering Dorothy's name. She thought about all the words left unspoken, the connections never made, the love that was smothered under layers of fear and shame and pride. "I want to do something with the house," Sarah said suddenly. "Dorothy's house, my house now. I don't want it to just sit there empty, another monument to isolation. I want to do something that would have terrified her, something that would have required vulnerability and connection and all the things she couldn't do." "Like what?" Sarah's mind was racing. "A support group for single mothers. Dorothy was a single mother for 12 years before she married Henry. She went through hell, and she did it alone because she was too ashamed to ask for help. What if I turned her house into a place where women don't have to be alone, where they can share their stories and support each other and not carry everything by themselves?" Patricia's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant. That's exactly what this city needs." "I have no idea how to start something like that." "So you'll learn. You'll reach out to organizations, talk to social workers, figure it out. The point isn't that you know how to do it. The point is that you're willing to try, that you're willing to create something that's about connection instead of isolation." Sarah felt a flutter of something she hadn't felt in years. Excitement, purpose, hope. "My grandmother would have hated this. She spent her whole life keeping secrets, and I'm going to turn her house into a place where people tell the truth." "Good. Let the dead rest. You're alive. Act like it." Over the next 3 months, Sarah's life transformed. She cut her hours at the hospital to 30 per week. She started seeing Patricia's therapist twice a week. She joined a book club and a yoga class and forced herself to attend even when she wanted to hide at home. She went on 5 dates with 3 different men and hated all of them, but she went. She called old friends from nursing school and apologized for disappearing. Some of them accepted the apology, some didn't. She learned to live with both outcomes. And she started the support group. It took work, endless phone calls, meetings with nonprofit organizations, paperwork, insurance, liability waivers. Sarah converted Dorothy's living room into a meeting space, the dining room into a childcare area. She partnered with a local church and a women's shelter to spread the word. She reached out to social workers, obstetricians, family court advocates. The first meeting, held on a Tuesday evening in April, drew 3 women. Sarah made coffee and set out cookies and felt like a failure. But the 3 women talked for 2 hours, sharing stories of custody battles and financial struggles and the exhaustion of doing everything alone. When they left, they hugged Sarah and thanked her and asked when the next meeting would be. The second meeting drew 7 women. The third drew 11. By the 6th meeting in June, Sarah had 15 regular attendees and a waiting list. She brought in guest speakers, lawyers, financial advisors, therapists. She organized a clothing swap and a toy exchange.
She helped one woman find affordable childcare and another file for child support. The house that had been Dorothy's hiding place became a place where women could stop hiding. Sarah thought about her grandmother constantly during those months. She wondered what Dorothy would think of what she'd done with the house. Would she be proud, angry, ashamed that her secrets were now visible, that her home was filled with strangers sharing their vulnerabilities? But mostly, Sarah realized, it didn't matter what Dorothy would think. Dorothy was dead. Her choices were made, her patterns set, and her story finished. Sarah was alive, and she got to choose differently.
On a warm evening in July, Sarah stood in Dorothy's living room, her living room, and looked at the circle of women sitting on folding chairs. 15 faces, ranging from 19 to 43, all of them single mothers, all of them struggling, all of them finding ways to survive. Tonight's topic was telling your children the truth. One of the women, Monica, had asked how to explain to her 6-year-old daughter why Daddy wasn't coming back. Another, Jessica, was debating whether to tell her teenage son that his father was in prison. The conversations were raw, painful, beautiful. Sarah waited until the formal part of the meeting ended and the women were mingling, drinking coffee, sharing phone numbers. Then she cleared her throat. I want to tell you all something about why I started this group. The room quieted. Sarah took a breath. This house belonged to my grandmother, Dorothy. She was a single mother in 1963, which was a very different time. She had my mother out of wedlock, which was considered shameful back then. She never told my mother who her father was. She kept it secret her whole life, and that secret poisoned everything. My mother grew up not knowing half her heritage. She spent her whole life feeling incomplete and never understanding why. Sarah pulled out the photograph of Dorothy and James. She'd had it enlarged and framed, and now it hung on the wall where Dorothy's nursing school graduation portrait used to be. That's my grandmother and my grandfather. His name was James Williams. He was a civil rights activist. He and my grandmother fell in love in 1962, but they couldn't be together. He was married, she got pregnant, he went to prison, and they both decided it was easier to stay apart than to fight for each other. So they spent 60 years apart. They both died alone, still loving each other, having wasted their entire lives hiding from the truth. Sarah looked at the faces staring at her. I started this group because I don't want your children to grow up the way my mother did. I don't want them to have holes in their stories, questions they're afraid to ask, shame they inherit from secrets they don't understand. Your stories are hard, they're messy and complicated and sometimes ugly, but they're yours, and your children deserve to know them. Monica raised her hand tentatively. But what if the truth hurts them? What if it's better not to know? The truth always comes out eventually, Sarah said. And when it does, the hurt is worse because it's mixed with betrayal. My mother died never knowing her father. I'll never forgive my grandmother for that. Not because she had an affair, not because she got pregnant, but because she stole my mother's right to know who she was. Jessica spoke up. My son's father is in prison for armed robbery. He made terrible choices, but he's still his father. I've been lying, telling my son his dad is working overseas. But my son is 14 now, and he's starting to ask questions I can't answer. I thought I was protecting him, but maybe I'm just protecting myself from having a hard conversation. Probably both, Sarah said gently. That's human. We protect ourselves, and we call it protecting them. But kids are stronger than we think. They can handle truth. What they can't handle is feeling like they can't trust the people who are supposed to love them most. The conversation continued for another hour. Women sharing their fears about truth-telling, their worries about judgment, their questions about how much to reveal and when. Sarah didn't have all the answers. She just kept saying, tell the truth in age-appropriate ways. Let your children ask questions. Don't hide from the hard conversations. Be human with them. When everyone finally left, Sarah sat alone in the quiet house. She thought about Dorothy, about the letter that was never sent, about all the conversations that never happened. She thought about James whispering Dorothy's name as he died. She thought about her mother, who'd spent her whole life wondering about the father-shaped hole in our history. And then she did something Dorothy never did. She took out her phone and recorded a video. "Hi, my name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 32 years old. I'm a nurse. I'm single. I'm the granddaughter of Dorothy Harrison and James Williams, who fell in love in 1962 despite every reason not to. Their love story ended in separation and secrets and 60 years of regret. I'm recording this because I don't want to repeat their mistakes. I want to live my life out loud. I want to tell the truth even when it's hard. I want to choose vulnerability over safety, connection over isolation." Sarah paused, feeling foolish, but continuing anyway. "I don't know if I'll ever have children. I don't know if I'll ever fall in love or get married or do any of the things my grandmother couldn't do. But if I do, if someone watches this someday, I want them to know that I tried. I tried to be braver than the people who came before me. I tried to break the patterns. I tried to live." She saved the video and sent it to her cloud storage. Maybe no one would ever see it. Maybe it would just exist in digital space. Another message to ghosts. But she'd done it. She'd spoken her truth out loud. And that was something. 6 months later, Sarah received an unexpected phone call. A man's voice, unfamiliar, nervous. "Is this Sarah Mitchell?" "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is David Williams. I'm your uncle? James Williams was my father." Sarah's heart stopped. "Marcus's brother?" "Half-brother, different mothers. Dad got my mom pregnant in 1967 after he got out of prison. They never married, but he was in my life, sort of, when he was around." David's voice was thick with emotion. "He told me about you before he died. Left a letter with his lawyer to be delivered to me 6 months after his death. In it, he explained everything about Dorothy, about your mother Elizabeth, about meeting you at the end. He wanted me to reach out. Said he wasted his whole life running from family, and he hoped I'd be smarter." Sarah sat down heavily. "I didn't know he had another son." "He had 3 of us, actually. Marcus with Clara, me with my mom, and another son, Jerome, with a woman he dated in the 70s. We're scattered all over the country, and none of us knew about the others until Dad died. His lawyer tracked us all down and sent us each a letter. We've been talking for the past few months, trying to piece together who our father actually was." "And what did you find?" David laughed bitterly. "A man who was brilliant and passionate and completely incapable of commitment. A man who changed the world through his activism and ruined lives through his relationships. A man we're all still trying to forgive." "Sounds about right," Sarah said. "The thing is," David continued, "we want to meet you. All of us, me, Jerome, and Marcus's kids, Dad's grandkids. We want to know the woman Dad talked about in his final days. We want to hear about Dorothy, about the letters, about everything we never got to know." Sarah felt tears prickling her eyes. "I'd like that. There's something else. Jerome is a documentary filmmaker. He wants to make a film about Dad's life, but also about the personal cost, about what it meant to fight for justice while destroying your own family, about the complexity of heroes. He wants to interview you, if you're willing." Sarah thought about Dorothy's secrets, about the letter that was never sent, about the truth that was buried for 60 years. She thought about her grandmother's letter. Maybe you'll find it someday. Maybe you won't. Maybe it doesn't matter. But it did matter. Truth always mattered. "I'll do it," Sarah said, "on one condition." "What's that?" "The film has to include Dorothy's story too. Not just as Jamesy's lover, but as her own person, a nurse who got pregnant and lost everything and survived anyway. A woman who made mistakes and lived with them and did the best she could with terrible options.
She deserves to be more than a footnote in someone else's story. Deal, David said. We'll tell both their stories, the whole messy truth.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.